the Power Cat Game Day postgame. Third win in a row for K-State. This one on the road at TCU. And John Kurtz, Cole Manbeck, I'm Corey Dean. And let me tell you guys, this is an interesting scenario that K-State's in, obviously. They're starting a true freshman on the road. You know it's going to be tough. A TCU defense is going to throw everything at them. They've already got a huge win over Texas. And K-State wins this one. A little ugly and a little old school defense and special teams, but a defensive touchdown in the second half, and things got pretty unnecessarily exciting there with a repeat of a Hail Mary at the end of that game. That was, but that's all things considered this year, an ugly win, I think, is a fantastic win in Big 12 play. Kind of your initial thoughts of this one.
Yeah, they just needed to get out of there with a win somehow, because now you have a bye week and you have Kansas and then West Virginia, pretty winnable stretch coming up here. Yeah, I'm anticipating Will Howard is going to be the quarterback for a long time, and so you're going to have to get him ready over the bye week, and then Kansas, and hopefully develop some confidence. This is the one in the stretch of basically in a month period here. This is the one that seemed really tricky, going to play Gary Patterson on the road and first start for Will Howard and all of that. So, to me, you didn't need many style points with this one. Just escaping there with a win was the important part, and they did that. And obviously, a ton of credit to the defense. The defense was lights out. Joe Klanderman, I thought, put on a coaching clinic in front of Gary Patterson, who's been one of the best defensive minds in college football for a long time. So they deserve a lot of the credit there. And I think some of what you saw in the second half was getting fairly conservative offensively because of the situation, which I totally understand. Will Howard handled himself well, but there were a couple turnover-worthy throws, including the one that got intercepted. So that was the one thing you couldn't do, was give TCU the pick six that you had back, something like that. So I understand the way that it all played out. The offense was a little bit frustrating to watch at times, but don't understate how big of a deal it was just to come away with a win in that game.
I would echo what John's thoughts are, Corey, is, this was really just about grinding out a win and figuring out a way to escape Fort Worth with a victory and getting to 3-0 with a manageable schedule for the next couple of weeks and getting to that bye week. And now they've reached the point where they're 3-0 with the bye week, and hopefully you can use this bye week to not necessarily game prep for an opponent, but get Will Howard more in sync with the offense, with his receivers, more in tune, fine-tune everything on the offensive side of the football. And then you've got KU, which, is, I'm not going to say an exhibition type game, but it's a nice game for him to really be able to get a little bit more experience and certainly get more of a feel in this offense. And so it was an ugly game, but you don't apologize for any win, especially this year. And, to escape that one, I mean, K-State was, I think the closing line was 10.5-point underdogs right before kickoff yesterday. So you get out of there in a game that you really, dominated for the most part, especially on the defensive side of the football. And it never really felt like, once K-State got it to 21-7, it didn't feel like TCU had much of a shot. Now, as Corey mentioned, it got a little unnecessarily exciting at the end, and I was up pacing a little bit back and forth. But credit to the defense. I mean, they went out and won this game, and don't discredit the TCU offense K-State faced. That was a TCU offense that had 33 points and 34 points in each of its first two games. They were 10th in the country with 9 yards per pass attempt, and K-State shut down that passing game. They only averaged 4 yards per pass attempt in the game. It seems so long ago that we were worried about K-State's secondary after the Arkansas State game and how great that unit has been the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I don't know what switch got flipped at halftime against OU. But, I mean, so you take the second half performance against Oklahoma, which was great. You shut out Texas Tech in the first half of that game and really kind of close down that offense. You, for the most part, are holding TCU down on the road. And it's a team that's doing it in a couple ways. Not only is the secondary good, but they're getting after the quarterback. Like, K-State is now known, it seems like, yet again, for a team that's going to come after you. And after several years of kind of like, I don't want to say passive defense, but that just wasn't the strategy for the Cats. But, man, they are really getting after the quarterback, and it's making a huge impact, especially in Big 12 play.
Yeah, I mean, as good as the secondary has been, and they have been really good, and now they're really deep because they were forced to go deeper a couple of weeks ago at Oklahoma. The pass rush, to me, has been the biggest difference in the defense because a lot of times they're able to get pressure with just 4. I mean, they're not having to send a ton on blitzes to get to the quarterback because of Wyatt Hubert, Khalid Duke, Boom Massey. I mean, Drew Wiley inside. He had some nice moments yesterday. I mean, they are really doing a nice job with that. And you can see it not just in the way that, the overall numbers would reflect what's happening defensively, but you can see it just in the face of opposing quarterbacks when you're watching them. I mean, Max Duggan got really beat up in that game yesterday and benched. And I don't know, felt a little bit Spencer Rattlery, his benching, like, hey, maybe there's a little minor something going on, but let's see if this other guy can provide a spark because nothing is working here. It just felt like K-State mentally and physically wore down Duggan, who's been a really good quarterback. I mean, he came in the second half of the Iowa State game in their season opener, and they put up 27 points. Like, they probably win that game if he actually starts, and K-State just completely shredded him. And did it in a day and age, by the way, where it's really hard to get hits on the quarterback and do it legally and not have guys being thrown out of the game. So I thought that was really impressive. It's clearly, the best front four that K-State has had in a while. Especially with the emergence of Khalid Duke right now. And that to me has been the biggest key in what's going on with the defense.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, the front four and the secondary to me are the strength of this football team right now. And like John said, I mean, they're not bringing many blitzes, which enables them to sit guys back in coverage and have max coverage and still get pressure with that front four. And they've developed tremendous depth along that as well. And so you've got, by my count, you've got 6 corners that you feel really good about playing right now with all the additional depth they've developed. And then you've also got really 8 guys up front on the D line that you can just continually rotate in and out, and you don't lose much of a step. I mean, Boom Massey has really come on this year. Now that he's fully healthy, it's really nice to see what he can do now that he's not playing banged up. And Drew Wiley, you mentioned him, John, he's leading the team in tackles for loss with 4. And so, I don't even think of him as much of a pass rusher, and he's had a couple really nice pass rushing moves this year, had a big sack yesterday. I think that is the biggest difference, that they're able to beat up on these offensive lines. And I thought they wore Duggan down yesterday mentally and physically by putting some hits on him. And there were a few times similar to what we saw with Spencer Rattler, where, he was starting to pull the ball down before the pressure was even there because they were in his head and he just felt it coming. And so that's the huge deal with this. And if you go back to Corey, you mentioned the second half of that OU game. If you go back to the fourth quarter of the Oklahoma game, since then, the opponents have had 28 possessions against K-State's defense and have scored 35 points. I mean, that's 1.3 points per drive. I mean, that's tremendous. I mean, the defense has just been phenomenal these last few weeks.
Well, AJ Parker, or as he goes on Twitter, Parker Island, the pick 6, and then you want to talk about a block on a quarterback getting in the end zone. Holy cow. That was fun from Elijah Sullivan. But so K-State is able to kind of, I mean, it's not a throwback win, but it almost is a throwback. When you score on defense, you're incredible again on special teams. This is the 4th game in a row where they've either blocked a field goal or a punt. Like, this is I think that, when Chris Kleiman came in as coach, was one of the things he says, we're going to play aggressive on defense and special teams. We're going to run the football. This kind of the switch has really been flipped. Blake Lynch is a 53-yarder. I didn't know that was going to almost kind of surprised when they ran him out. Special teams is just gigantic right now. Those are the things that I think that, especially in a year that's so weird right now, is really going to kind of carry momentum for this team for a while.
Yeah, special teams was really good in a lot of different areas. I mean, I'm just pulling up the punting stats here, which I know is not something that I would typically talk a whole lot about, but they had 6 punts, averaged 45 yards per punt, put 3 inside the 20, and gave up no returns. So that was huge to be able to control TCU field position-wise, and that's a part of, I think, wearing down Duggan, both physically and mentally. Is like, the guy never had great field position, was always having to try and drive the length of the field, and then K-State's defense was swarming him at every turn. I mean, there was one Blake Lynch missed field goal. He's been more boom or bust this year with, hitting some really long clutch field goals, obviously, if you go back to Oklahoma, but missing some shorter ones, which is a little bit concerning. But, overall, to block a kick 4 games in a row, which they've done now, they had the 3 block punts, and then you block a field goal yesterday. To have the punt coverage unit be as good as it was yesterday. The one thing we really haven't seen much of is the return game, although there was a decent return by Phillip Brooks yesterday also. So it's looked a little bit different this year in how they're doing it, but they're still being incredibly effective with special teams. And I think that is really important to point out, because everybody assumed that with Bill Snyder and Sean Snyder leaving, that there would be some drop off in special teams, right? And I think they've done a great job of maintaining that while not having a full-time dedicated special teams coach. They don't have someone like that on the staff, which is how a lot of people do it now, but it's Chris Kleiman being one of them. You can save a full-time position on your staff for another place and then dedicate. Basically, Stanton Weber, I think, is doing a lot of that. And then you have everybody else chipping in, but it's worked out really well. And kudos to Kleiman and Stanton Weber and all the guys that are working on special teams right now, because they've been really good.
It's easy to take for granted, but just that they continue to do it week in and week out. They've made game-changing plays all 4 weeks now in the season. Corey, you mentioned blocking a kick every week. John mentioned the punting game. I mean, look, the Ty Zentner punt yesterday, that was, first of all, he had a 65-yarder, which was phenomenal. And then the 44-yard punt to pin them at the 4 with 1:05 left was tremendous, because if that ball goes back in the end zone and they're at the 20-yard line, I mean, I'm a little more nervous. But if you look and watch the game there in the last minute, it took TCU 45 seconds of game clock to actually get to the 20 after that punt. So they had to burn almost 80% of the remaining time just to get to where they would have been if that punt goes in the end zone. And that's significant, because there was 20 seconds left by the time they actually got outside the 20-yard line. And so that was phenomenal that K-State was able to down that. The field goal unit, Blake Lynch, I mean, he has missed a couple kicks this year, but he's still, when you watch college kickers, I mean, you never trust college kickers. Blake Lynch is about as reliable as you're going to get. So you always feel good about him. And he's clearly developed some additional leg strength. I don't know if they would have felt comfortable with him outside of 50 in the past, but this year, I think Derek Young at K-State Online mentioned he was hitting 54, 55 yarders in warmups yesterday. Looked comfortable from that distance. So they've developed an asset there, and Lynch is so good. The punting game's been good. The coverage units have been good. And like you mentioned, John, they haven't really sprung a huge return. Now, they haven't had a ton of opportunities the way teams are kicking off to them in the kick return game, but they have had a couple nice punt returns. They haven't housed one yet, but I think that's coming, because they continue to block more and more kicks. I think punt teams are going to overprotect, focused on that, and not get into their lanes in case they don't find an alley and bust one.
Well, the two freshmen kind of, it's certainly not a step back on offense, but TCU did a pretty good job of trying to rein in Deuce Vaughn most of the game. Will Howard was, he had some moments that was tough. I was surprised on the wheels on him on the 70-yard run early in the game. Just kind of disappointing for that not to end up in the end zone eventually. But those two guys, I mean, that's road adversity. This is all building steps for both of them. I mean, obviously Will Howard's his first week of getting full starter reps leading into this game. But a little bit about those guys, about kind of where this game sets them, and having a bye week next week. Like, where's the chance for development there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bye week is going to be crucial for Will. And I would just say that I thought the way Will played was an extension of what we saw against Texas Tech. I think if you just extrapolated his performance against Tech out over the course of an entire game, it's about the same as what we saw, which is fine, which means he handled himself fine. A couple things that I really like about him. He's clearly poised. He doesn't really let too much bother him. And he's not afraid to throw it down the field. Like, he's not afraid to take shots, and that doesn't change even after his interception that he threw. He didn't turtle up. I mean, he was still able to go chuck it all over the place when he needed to. It doesn't feel like he's wildly out of control. Now, were there 3 or 4 plays that maybe more like 3 that could have been turnovers, including the one that was? Yes, there were, and he makes you nervous sometimes, but it doesn't seem like it's as wildly erratic as you would anticipate somebody in his situation to be. So I think that's really encouraging for where things are going in the future. I mean, the stat line doesn't look nearly as good yesterday. Let's see what his. So he goes 8 of 19 for 117 yards and an interception. Doesn't look as good as it did against Texas Tech, but against Texas Tech, Deuce Vaughn and Briley Moore have 150 yards or whatever it is, running
huge
after
chunk
the catch.
plays.
Yeah, over 100 yards running after the catch that really inflated those numbers. So, I mean, credit to him, obviously, for getting them the ball. But I think it was a performance that, to me, was very much in the same ballpark as what he did against Texas Tech. Now, you can tell, I think anybody now reasonably can understand watching this that the better option at quarterback right now would be a healthy Skylar Thompson. Unfortunately, I doubt that that's going to be available to you here for a while. So, ceiling maybe lowered a bit on what the team can do this year, but Will Howard is certainly capable of still winning a lot more games this year. I mean, I think that much is definitely evident.
Yeah, I mean, I would continue to reiterate that I think Will Howard has an extremely bright future. I think he's very mature. I think he's very poised for his age. He did miss on a couple balls yesterday, and obviously he wasn't helped by a couple drops. And I'd say one of the other things that Kansas State needs to get better at is the wide receiver play. Guys just aren't getting open. I mean, they're not creating enough separation. You look at the last few weeks, it's been Briley Moore and Deuce Vaughn really in the passing game, and Sebastian Taylor sprinkled in, but nothing from Malik Knowles, nothing from Joshua Youngblood. And I know those guys haven't played a full series of snaps throughout a game. Knowles hardly played yesterday, and Youngblood hasn't been on the field much at receiver. But, I mean, it's basically been Phillip Brooks and Sebastian Taylor. There haven't been game-changing plays at the receiver position. And so that they got to get better. Now, I mean, the thing that concerns me is K-State wasn't able to really run the ball yesterday, because if you take away Will Howard's 80-yard run, K-State had 92 yards and 37 carries, which is 2.5 yards per carry. Now, I know you can't take that away, but they couldn't consistently grind out yards. And normally I wouldn't be that alarmed against the TCU defense because they're historically good against the run. But this year in their first 2 games, they were allowing more yards per carry than all but one team in college football at 7 yards per carry. So K-State couldn't get the running game going. And I think what we're going to start to see, and what we saw a little bit yesterday, is teams are going to dare Will Howard to beat them deep. And they're going to come load the box, take away K-State's running game against an inexperienced offensive line, and make him complete some challenging throws downfield. And the K-State receivers, we've talked about how they seem more explosive at the receiver position this year, right, guys? But we haven't seen it these last couple of weeks. They're not getting open. They're not separating. Can that start to change? Because they're going to have to start making more plays downfield, because the running game just isn't there so far this year. They're averaging 3.6 yards per carry. That's just not going to get it done for a Messingham offense. So that's where my concern lies. But I think ultimately the bye week, as we talked about earlier, comes at a great time, because you can fix a lot of these things and you can get Will Howard more confident. You can work on the passing game, because that's going to be critical moving forward.
Well, home against Kansas in 2 weeks is what K-State fans are looking forward to. As you look around the Big 12, any surprise at all from either one of you that OU Texas was another first 1 to 50 no defense being played contest?
Well, I mean, I was just surprised. I guess maybe I shouldn't have been, but surprised at how ugly and sloppy that it was before it got into overtime. I mean, that game changed very quickly from, hey, this is just a pretty ugly display of 2 teams that are not very disciplined and not very sharp and not very good. I mean, they looked like bad football teams there for a lot of that game, until it turned into just an instant classic there at the end. And, you know, you can appreciate and say, hey, these guys definitely were going all out. I mean, there was a ton of effort there. I kind of feel bad for Sam Ehlinger. I mean, it feels like he's trying to do a lot of this on his own, where the rest of the team is not as locked in as him, and their offense basically, when it comes down to crunch time, is like, hey, let's just let Sam go and see what Sam can do. And, you know, a lot of times that ends up going pretty well. But yeah, I just think that is a game that is still not going to reflect very well on the league, because, like it or not, everybody judges the league by Texas and Oklahoma. And maybe the way it ended, it'll help a little bit, the way that it ended, to take away from some of what the first half was in particular. As far as people's memory, like not being burned in their brain, how ugly of a game that was for as long as it was. But I still don't think it was a great look for the league. I don't know that anybody's looking at that game and saying, well, you know, Texas and Oklahoma actually aren't that bad. I mean, they really, frankly, Cole, to me, just look like 2 pretty average football teams right now.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, yeah, Texas hasn't really looked that good in all 3 of its Big 12 games. They could easily be 0-3, and you could say the same thing about Oklahoma with the way they looked yesterday. The only thing I would say is I was a bit surprised how Spencer Radler actually responded to being benched. I didn't know if he mentally yet would have that ability to bounce back the way he did, and he was pretty solid when they inserted him back in the game in the second half and in the overtimes. I thought when Texas scored first after everything had happened, you know, in the comeback, and then they score to get up 7 in overtime, I thought OU might be done at that point. I thought, you know, Radler might fold under the pressure, but he didn't. So that was great for him. In the end, I think it's a good result for K-State when you talk about getting to the Big 12 title game, because you already had essentially a 3-game lead on OU with the tiebreaker, with them already having 2 losses. And now you get Texas a second Big 12 loss. And so you've got a 2-game lead on them. You look at the standings now, it's K-State, Oklahoma State, and Iowa State, the only unbeaten teams in this league. And West Virginia, Baylor are 1-1. And so K-State has a real shot to play in Arlington if they can snag a couple wins these next 2 games and come out unscathed and get to 5-0 for a grueling part of the schedule that will come in those last 4 games of the year. But nothing overly surprising in that game. Both those teams did not look great. It was a little bit disappointing to watch that game, but I guess it was exciting in the overtimes at least.
Yeah, Fox kicked over to the K-State game. I thought that game was over, and find out 45 minutes later they're still going into overtime. For Texas Oklahoma. Well, Iowa State gets a win as part of as Cole mentioned, the Ag School takeover of the Big 12. The state schools: Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State. I don't still know how good Iowa State is knocking off Texas Tech, but they kind of seem to chug along. This is like worst case scenario for Fox, right? A K-State Iowa State championship game, potentially in Arlington. But it is kind of fun right now that the teams that got, I mean, Oklahoma State got buzzed to begin the year, but everybody was so down on K-State and Iowa State for taking those week 1 losses on national television, and now those are the two teams right atop the standings, undefeated at 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, I will just reiterate what I was saying at the time, and I think it was a mistake to go about it the way the Big 12 did, scheduling-wise, just from a perception standpoint, to throw those non-conference games in there, because the SEC is not doing it. Obviously, we're not going to see the Big 10 play games like that. The ACC did do a non-con, right? But it just – nobody else put themselves in a precarious position to be playing tough group of 5 teams. Well, hardly anybody else in college football was actually playing games. And so, you just set yourself up for trouble, because what we've seen throughout the entire season is teams that have had a long layoff or just haven't played yet, playing against teams that already have, really struggled. And I was trying to beat that drum as hard as I could at the time. And now looking back on it, I mean, it seems like there is a lot of credence to that, right? So I think that is a problem for the Big 12's perception the rest of the year. And I mean, listen, it would be a perception problem no matter what if K-State, Iowa State is the Big 12 championship game, or they're at the top of the Big 12 standings. That's always going to be an uphill climb, from a respect standpoint. But for now, I mean, K-State and Iowa State, it's great. They're both up there. I do think Iowa State is, much as I have the shtick where I hate on them all the time, I think they're a pretty solid team. But I think Oklahoma State's the one that isn't getting as much love or run as they should right now, because they had a week 1 game against Tulsa that they took a lot of crap for also. And Tulsa now looks pretty good because they beat UCF last week. Certainly looks like a better team than what we thought they were. And Oklahoma State was just going through their week 1 struggles, and they lost their quarterback. I mean, that's the other thing. You think about the position K-State's in right now with Will Howard. It's been the exact same thing for Oklahoma State with a true freshman in Shane Illingworth, slightly higher rated recruit. I mean, imagine if Jake Rubley, for instance, were out there for K-State right now. That's what Oklahoma State is going through. But I think their defense has been so lights out that their offense will get it figured out. I mean, I've got confidence that Mike Gundy, with Chuba Hubbard and Tylan Wallace and getting Spencer Sanders back at some point in time, and really Illingworth's been pretty good on his own. I think they'll figure out their offense, and their defense has been nailed. So I think Oklahoma State's been like flying under the radar without getting any real talk.
Sure could be an exciting game on November 7th if Kansas State takes care of business these next 2 games and gets to 5-0, and Oklahoma State takes care of business. I haven't looked at the Cowboys' schedule. Obviously, they had a bye yesterday, but if they both came in unbeaten in league play, I mean, maybe College Game Day is coming to Manhattan on November 7th. Could be a very compelling game. They haven't been to Manhattan in a long time. Now, it'd be kind of sad because we wouldn't be able to gather outside and have a bunch of people there, but could set up back-to-back huge monstrous games for K-State. Talk about College Game Day. They could be visiting back-to-back games in Ames, Iowa, if Iowa State continues to win and both teams are unbeaten going into that game. So that's going to be a very difficult stretch. That's why this bye week right now is so critical for K-State to get the offense going, get the passing game with Will Howard in sync with everybody. So, yeah, it's a big week for K-State to get better. And the Oklahoma State, just getting back to that point, I mean, it's a very talented team, obviously, and just hope both teams can take care of business to set up a great showdown here in just a few weeks.
Yeah, Okie Light's supposed to get Baylor next weekend, but right now Baylor's practice facility is closed due to COVID, so that game might start to come into question. Or is that one that maybe gets pushed or rescheduled for a later date? And then, as John mentioned, that maybe a 2-week layoff comes in for the Cowboys before they would take on Iowa State. So I don't know. I think there's still things like scenarios like that yet to be played out, most likely in the Big 12. We're seeing it over in the NFL. We could kick over to a little bit of NFL talk before we wrap stuff up. Chiefs at noon. The scheduling right now in the NFL is just going to be potentially a giant mess with Kansas City potentially playing 3 games in 5 days. I mean, I know that's an exaggeration, but what are you looking forward to today for the Chiefs?
Man, just playing a game would be nice. Things have been going, but just keep things rolling. They've just been kind of grinding outside of the Baltimore game. It feels like it's been a lot of just grinding it out this year, taking what defenses are giving them. Patrick Mahomes having to kind of work his way down the field as opposed to these crazy, quick hitting, explosive plays. The New England game just felt to me like very business-like may not even be the right word because it was pretty sloppy and gross there for a while, but they're just kind of hanging out. They know that they're going to be able to, when push comes to shove offensively, score enough to win the game. So they just sort of, okay, let you do your thing. We'll hang out. We know we're going to be good enough to win. And then bam, they just pounce on you and explode. And I think especially with the Patriots quarterback situation, that was going to be inevitable. But there have been similarities between the Patriots game, the Chargers game, and then to a lesser extent, the Texans. I still think this team isn't really firing on all cylinders. And even against Baltimore, there were so many unforced errors that went on in that game. We just haven't seen the Chiefs come out and really play like a complete A game yet. And yet I would still say that I think they're the best team in the league. So I don't know that Las Vegas, really seriously threatens that today. And I think KC will just keep the thing rolling.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I mean, I expect KC to roll today. I was already looking past Las Vegas, actually going into today and moving ahead toward Buffalo.
Yeah.
And in fact, on Monday night after they beat the Patriots, I was texting some friends about the next big game against Buffalo, and they were like, "We play the Raiders next." I was like, "Yeah, but I'm not worried about the Raiders. The Chiefs don't lose to the Raiders. They don't lose to the division really much." And so I'm looking forward to the Buffalo game whenever that is played. I saw the Titans again had another positive test today.
They did today. Right.
So we'll see if that game now gets moved back to Thursday after they talked about moving the Chiefs game to Sunday, if the Bills were able to get their game in. And who knows what's going on there with the schedule, but that'll be an exciting game. But getting back to the Raiders game, I expect the Chiefs to roll right along. And hopefully they look a little more sharp today. Like John mentioned, they definitely haven't looked very sharp in the majority of their games. Part of that, first of all, the game was moved at the last minute to a Monday night. There's no crowds really, the limited capacity. It's just no preseason. It's hard to be a well-oiled machine early on. So hopefully all these teams across the league start to get better now that they've got a few games under their belt and look more in sync.
Well, as far as games on the schedule, that seems to be the fun one today. Chiefs Raiders, as far as being kind of a rivalry matchup. You don't have a whole lot of other stuff. I mean, the Eagles Steelers isn't a great game with as bad as the Eagles are playing. It's Giants Cowboys doesn't seem like that's a couple struggling teams there. A little bit of luster off that. A one combined win between those two teams right now. So I don't know. And the Patriots Broncos game is out because Patriots had a positive test this morning. So that game that got moved to Monday has now moved to off the schedule.
Not a compelling schedule after hearing you rattle that off, Corey. So maybe I should volunteer to take the kids to the park today and do my parenting duties after the Chiefs game and act like I'm doing my wife a favor there.
Gonna bank some house points for when you need it for that Chiefs Bills game, right?
Oh, I could be watching afternoon football right now, but I'm gonna give that up. And
hey, bank the points and take them.
Yep.
All right, gentlemen. Well, bye week on the way for K-State. Feels pretty good to be 3-0 right now. So that's this is fun football for K-State fans, despite all the stuff that's going on. You're certainly, I think, in a, if you laid out before the season, hey, your starting quarterback is going to be out, you're going to lose your season opening game. I don't think anybody picks 3-0 in conference play. So I think K-State fans should feel like they're in a pretty good spot, all things considered.
Oh yeah, no kidding. All
right, well, gentlemen, enjoy your week, and we'll reconvene here in a couple of weeks, hopefully after a blowout win over Kansas. Have a great week, and we'll see you guys soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Corey.